This is the NA Happy Hour.
Anyway, thanks for inviting me, guys. I've been looking forward to this, and Chris and I had a really good intro chat the other day, and I think it went well. So I'm excited, to hear what you guys got in store and how things are going.
Yeah,
And I got to look at the talking points. I'm gonna just periodically. I'm just looking at them on my iPad
yeah,
over there.
definitely. And we by no means need to hit every talking point, and if other
Yeah.
talking points come up, we'll just kind of go with the flow of the conversation. But
Yep.
just to kind of start things off, Sean, I figured you can do a little bit of an introduction to yourself, who you are, what your background is, and your introduction to the non-alcoholic scene, just for our listeners to get to know you a little bit more.
Great, thanks, guys. This is very interesting for me. My name's Sean Moon. I spent probably the last 20 years of my career in the magazine publishing industry, where I managed several magazines in the food, beverage, hospitality, and gaming sector. And apart from working in restaurants and bars when I was back in university, I hadn't really been involved with the restaurant and food service industry, but the opportunity came up to manage the Canadian restaurant and food service news a few years ago, and prior to me retiring. And I jumped at it because I thought, wow, this is a really exciting space. It's such a large and important employer um, in North America. Obviously, not only for young people, but for just a lot of people who go on to do other things, whether they're in front of the house, back of the house, or wanting to get into some management roles, or just put them way through school, tending bar or waiting tables. Prior to that, I'd worked many years in the health and nutrition field, usually in marketing and communications roles, from management all the way through sales. And I enjoyed that. And of course, you get to lots of exposure to different new products and marketing strategies and that kind of thing. So I was well versed in certain aspects of food service and the health and nutrition, and I thought they would be a good fit together. Um, when I guess I got involved with the NA beer industry kind of out of necessity about 15 years ago, when I decided it was time to give up alcohol. And there was a couple of personal situations, mainly health related, that caused me to take a second look at not only my own drinking habits, but the health reasons. As I was getting older, I found that 25 or 30 years of being a fairly professional drinker, that it was starting to take its toll on my body. So it was time to make a change. And when I first, like most people who drink regular beer or other alcoholic beverages, um, I I knew that there were a couple of booze-free beers out there that I thought generally I probably had one or two over the time. There wasn't much in Canada at that point to really speak of. A couple of really bad grocery store brands, and they just tasted like kind of beer flavored ginger ale to me. They were very sweet, low carbonation, and no hops to speak of at all. They're very overly malty, usually, some sort of sugar or not even a really good malt in these things. So I wasn't overly keen on making a switch from regular beer to the NA beer. And I think I was at a a food and restaurant show, where I was working with our magazine. Where we were there for the 4 days of the show, and I was just walking around and checking out some of the different booths that were there, and I ran across a gentleman named Ted Fleming from Partake, who had a booth there, and he had just come off of our Dragon's Den, which is our version of what's the show in the States now? It's where they bring new people with new products on,
Like
and they
Shark
bring
Tank.
Shark Tank. Canada, we have one called Dragon's Den, and he had just come back from taping his episode of introducing Partake Ale. I think he only had the IPA in the pail at that point, to Dragon's Den. And so I got talking to him at the food show, and he, he was very excited, obviously, and he said, "I haven't got this in any stores yet." And I thought, well, I'm not an expert on non-alcoholic beer by any means, but I had tried a few of the Erdinger, the German Weiss beers that I thought were probably the best that I'd tried up until that point. Again, I wasn't a regular purchaser of them by any means, but he had some product samples there, and I tried a couple, and it just blew me away. I said, I've never tasted a non-alcoholic beer that actually tasted like a regular beer. I couldn't believe he would get that close to it. And it was the IPA, obviously because of the increased hops in it, it just blew my mind. And I thought, I can't believe you're not in stores yet. So we've talked about his marketing strategy and how he was, going to bring it to market. And he was still waiting to hear back from the Dragons on Dragon's Den to see if he was actually going to get some financial backing. So apparently that went through for him. So he was able to partner with one of the breweries locally in Toronto, and maybe even some brewers in Calgary, and he got his product out. But that got me to thinking, it's like, wow, I just lucked upon this beer at a food show. I wonder what else is out there. And to no surprise, there was really nothing else at the market. There were a couple of the European brews that had come over. Ted also had a website called nearbeer.ca, premiumnearbeer.ca. And he would import all this stuff, or he had it warehoused. It wasn't even a drop ship company at that point. I think he actually had physical stock in a warehouse somewhere in Toronto, and you could go online and have it delivered. But at that point, the shipping fees were just through the roof. They were as much as the beer itself. And I thought, well, this isn't going to fly. It's no wonder nobody's ordering from him. He was having a real problem getting these beers, many of which, sounded great and had been on market over in Europe and the UK for a long time. So I started doing a little more digging, and I thought, well, if there's one small brewery in Canada that's able to produce this, I wonder where else this is going. And that just led me into kind of trying some of the major macro brands that were out at the time, the O'Douls, the Sharps, the ones that we've all heard about and generally turned us off a lot of NA beers to begin with. And I use the term NA beer as opposed to AF beer. AF beer tends to be more frequently used with European and the UK. I think from what I've read when I'm reading articles and whatnot, because they have some pretty wonky delineations between low alcohol and alcohol free and what you can call low alcohol or non-alcoholic beer. But I'll call it NA beer. And when I found out that there were actually virtually no other breweries in Canada at that point that were making their beers widely available, maybe they were locally only, but nothing that I could find online. I saw a couple of Facebook groups. I thought, well, I'll just put this into the search and see what comes up. And lo and behold, I think there was one or two to start out with. I think there's probably about 5 or 6 now, all different titles, and I'm probably members of most of them. I tend to lurk on more than I participate in some others that are private. The public ones, I don't comment quite as much. But I learned so much in a very short period of time that the U.S. was getting far more advanced as far as making these beers to offer, and some of the breweries that were popping up. Athletic was still a nascent brewery. It hadn't really come out with their sessions and all their seasonals and the variety of special beers that had come out. But I think Athletic was out, Surreal, Well-Being were the big 3 that I saw people talking about. And again, they only had 1 or 2 varieties, and they really hadn't expanded their repertoire very much. But I was excited to know that there was other beer nerds like me out there who were interested in still drinking beer, but that it didn't have alcohol in it. And to me, I always think of NA beer is just beer, and whether it has alcohol in it or not, that's a personal decision that you make for yourself. And I go for the quality of the beer rather than whether or not it's alcoholic. I don't drink alcohol because that's a health decision I made.
Hmm.
But I can see people like yourself, Chris. You mentioned that because you're a runner and in training and things like that, and I can see athletes. Heck, they named it athletic
Yeah.
brewing, right? That there's lots of reasons that people, whether or not they eschew alcohol completely, or if they still want to enjoy both, it's nice that there are these options out there. So that was kind of my introduction to the industry, and how I went beyond the awful first tastes and sips I had of O'Doul's. That's all you could get anywhere, and I thought, well, it's not really for me. I stick to Diet Coke or Club Soda.
Yeah.
It really wasn't something that I didn't think was going to be a real viable option for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, you're absolutely right. And even in the last 5 to 8 years, the amount of craft breweries that have come up doing non-alcoholic stuff, whether they're completely non-alcoholic like Athletic, or even now, as we talked about a little bit, there are more alcoholic breweries that are experimenting with non-alcoholic beers because they're recognizing the trend and the value and the, I guess, the public demand for non-alcoholic beers. Um, so, kind of segueing off of that, can you talk a little bit about how that industry has kind of evolved over time in Canada a little bit?
Sure. I mean, as far as what I could see from where I was perched in the magazine part of the industry, which tend to look at overall trends as it affected food service and related establishments. Now, food service might cover everything from restaurants to bars to facilities, golf courses, clubs, uh, nursing homes, a university food service operations. It's a big gamut. So it wasn't just looking at restaurants and bars. Those are the primary drivers, obviously, with a product like a non-alcoholic beer. And what I could see when our magazine used to publish a regular beer column written by a gentleman named Roger Mittag, who is a Cicerone, and he does a beer education. He has a beer education company. And I was able to learn more about not only how non-alcoholic beer fit into food service as a restaurant operator might look at it and say, does this offer some sort of added value to my customers who might not want to drink alcohol, or maybe somebody's a designated driver or wants to be the sober one in the group who's going to be responsible for getting everybody home safely. There were lots of reasons, but I think in Canada, the way over the last, I'll say 5 years or so, that I've seen, there's been some major drivers to increasing demand within the food service sector. Uh, and I think Chris and I had spoken earlier about there are certain demographic groups, such as the millennials, who tend to not be as heavy drinkers as, say, the baby boomers or the Gen Xers. I'm at the tail end of the baby boom, the beginning of the Gen X generations. Um, and in the millennial cohort in general, I think is driving a lot of different changes in food service, from fast casual restaurants, not necessarily the fine dining, but the more you go down and sit down, they've gone from the family style to what they call fast casual now. And that segment in the US might vary a little bit from the chains that are offered in Canada, but they tend to be chain operated and not local owners and independents. Um, and I think some of the other demographic groups have been certain religious groups that don't allow alcohol consumption, such as Muslims or devout Muslims, which we have a rather large percentage of population, and ever growing in our multicultural society in Canada. So there was some demand from that sector, not to mention stricter drunk driving laws that were coming into effect across the country, which were making people realize that, well, okay, I'm going to drink, but somebody's going to come with me or out to a restaurant. Not all of us are going to drink, or I'm going to have one and I can switch to something that isn't alcoholic. Hey, how about a good non-alcoholic beer? I still think that goal has a long way to go before we're getting that number up. But the last demographic group that I noticed is, of course, baby boomers. As I approached my retirement, was these are people that have used alcohol and maybe other substances since college days, and are finding themselves, their bodies just don't like it anymore. And whether or not they had an addiction issue or they didn't, they just were feeling lethargic, or that kind of stuff adds up after 25 or 30 years of regular consumption. So I think as those people, the baby boomers and the Gen Xers, are starting to be more health conscious and worried about where they're going with their health and their families, I'm seeing the trends move towards more health conscious beverages in general, whether that is things like smoothies and some of the power drinks and the protein shakes and all that kind of stuff that you see at grocery chains. But there's also, obviously non-alcoholic beers. As the quality and the variety and choice has gotten better, I think that will actually help drive it. Oddly enough, and it almost seems counterintuitive, I think one of the biggest impediments to the growth of the industry within both the restaurant sector and just the consumer retail sector has been the recovery industry itself. And you would think that an industry is tailor-made for consumption of non-alcoholic beverages, but for better or for worse, depending on what kind of recovery you're looking for and what kind of treatment program or plan you've been working for, certain self-help mutual aid groups, AA would be one of them, probably the biggest one, really frowns upon consumption of non-alcoholic beer. They highly recommend or absolutely forbid their members from drinking any kind of alcohol. They don't have a problem with nicotine or caffeine, but they do have a problem with non-alcoholic beer. Yeah. And I'm not trying to put a damper on the good things that AA does. I'm personally not a member of that fine organization, but because they serve a lot of value and they bring a lot of value to a lot of people in other ways. But that's a big impediment to try to grow a non-alcoholic beer industry when your largest recovery group says don't drink it. So not only are we trying to increase awareness amongst people who are maybe switching occasionally from alcoholic beer or full alcohol beer to low test, I think we've got some work to do, whether that means reaching out to these organizations and trying to build some bridges that could possibly be a greater understanding of it doesn't lead to addiction, or show me the proof that it does lead to addiction. I've never seen anything that shows that it leads people back down the slippery slope, as they call it. It personally hasn't affected me, but my reasons for drinking may have been different than somebody else's. So I can't speak for everybody that's in recovery or everybody that's made that conscious choice. But it is an impediment to the growth of the industry. Those are the main things that I've seen. But I think there's some other issues that are tangential to the whole NA beer thing that are also going to affect its growth. And things like delivery, shipping costs and shipping charges, because it's a heavy product, tends to cost a lot to ship. Companies are always going to be faced with that challenge, because one of the first complaints I see people when if you tell them about non-alcoholic beer and they do taste it and they say, wow, that's great, must be pretty cheap. Then they realize that it's about the same price as a regular beer. And then you have to go through the whole explanation as well. It actually goes through extra processes to get there. So it's just as expensive to make as regular beer, but without the kick. So a lot of people have a bit of a challenge getting their heads around that and trying to understand that there's a justification for the price level, I think. And once people can come to grips with that, I think that will help. But as I explained to Chris last week, we also have some pretty wonky interprovincial or interstate shipping regulations when it comes to alcoholic beverages, of which non-alcoholic beer falls under the category.
Yeah, that was one thing that I found really interesting about being able to brew it and then ship it, and then the negotiations you were talking about with, like, if you wanted to sell to a chain restaurant or a chain grocery store, that opened it up because you had to sell to the chains in all of the provinces, not just one or two, and that um, hinders the growth a lot of some of these smaller companies trying to start up and get in, because it's just, you don't have the time to, on top of managing a company, to go through all of those other hoops and paperwork and red tape and everything to get it in the bigger stores.
Absolutely, and I think that was one thing that Ted Fleming had impressed upon me from Partake, was that he had decided to focus his efforts on negotiating a deal with the LCBO, which is the Liquor Control Board of Ontario in my province, and that is the main retailer of alcohol, beer, wine, spirits, and beer in Ontario. And most provinces have a similar entity that deals with. You can only buy liquor like whiskey and vodka and rum in a government run liquor store. Beer now in most provinces has opened up a bit. It's usually available in grocery stores. We're not in gas stations, but grocery stores and some smaller retail outlets. But he said it was easier for him to negotiate one deal with the LCBO province wide than it was to deal with 4 or 5 different grocery chains. He just didn't have the staffing power, the marketing, the brokers, the sales agents, or anything to the reps to get out there and cut these deals with the retail locations. So he started with only making his beer available in LCBO stores, which is a challenge for somebody who doesn't want to go anywhere near alcohol. If you're telling them that the only place they can buy their non-alcoholic beer that's worth any quality is to go into a liquor store,
Yeah.
you're going to prevent a lot of people from doing that. So it's good. I'm glad to see that he was able to start making his products available. And I think they're in 3 or 4 large chains now across Canada. Online shipping and online ordering have been essential to the growth of this industry. I think probably you'll agree it's the same thing in the
Absolutely.
States. Just because of local state laws, but getting product into each state and each province is always a challenge. Warehousing issues, all that kind of stuff adds up. It adds dollars, it adds staffing requirements. And with online ordering and not having to ensure that products are in all these, Total Wine stores across the country, um, has really helped. And I think, especially during the pandemic, has saved the industry, having that online shipping available. So, um, those interprovincial and state guidelines and liquor laws are obviously, I think, are starting to fizzle away, which is good. Those kind of open borders when it comes to NA beer, since it's not a full strength alcoholic product. And I think a lot of the laws that these things are based on, at least in Canada anyway, a lot of the laws that these things are based on are ancient. They're
Yeah.
like they're 100 years old. And I mean, for example, in the gaming sector, we've finally gotten to the point where we can now do multiple game betting. In before on single game betting, you could only bet on multiple games in sports. So you could only bet on the only way you could bet on our provincial lottery, our sports lottery, was to bet the outcome of 6 different games. And all those games had to come out in your favor in order to win any money. So that's very difficult to do. And it's very difficult to get the casual, lottery buyer to get in. Now they finally allowed single game betting because all that money was going offshore to gray markets.
Yeah.
And I think similar things have been avoided, thankfully, in the NA beer industry with online ordering.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
how does Canada, in like a social aspect, perceive the non-alcoholic industry? Because I know, at least in America, that it's, well, if I'm going to drink a beer, I'm going to have a beer with alcohol. What's the point if there's no alcohol in it? So how do, like, fellow Canadians like react? What's their initial reaction when it's, oh, I'm having a non-alcoholic beer, and what's the kind of
Yeah.
stigmas applied to it?
Well, I think you probably had the I would guess that most of it is a very similar reaction to you probably had in your social
Yeah.
interactions in the U.S. Is what's the point?
Yeah.
What's the point? And to me, that from my personal perspective is that says more about their reasons for drinking than mine.
Mm-hmm.
If they say, "What's the point?" It's like, well, okay, so the only point for you to drink a beer is to get some sort of buzz. Okay, got it.
So then
Click. Oh,
my rebuttal to that is, so then why are you paying $14 for a single craft beer?
right.
If all you want is the buzz, pay $2
Aftershave
for
down
a
the road.
can of like
I
Bud
know.
Light or something and get,
Yeah,
well, it tastes good. So it's taste. Well, here's a drink that tastes good.
exactly. Exactly. And I once heard somebody, it was somebody from the UK, and he said, "Why do you drink non-alcoholic beer?" And he says, "Well, it's something to drink, isn't it? It's it's something to drink."
Yeah.
And whether it's like, why do people drink different flavors of soda pop? Why do they drink? I call it pop. I'm from Canada, and just like they do. Okay, Midwesterner calls it
Yep.
pop. Um, so there's to me it's I don't necessarily want something that's full of artificial sweeteners and all these kind of things. My answer is non-alcoholic beer is a healthy beverage that has all kinds of health benefits and flavor options and different tastes and pairings that can go with food. I got a lot of options with this thing, and you know what? Darn it, it tastes good. And I did drink beer for the taste, even when I drank the high test. So, but now there's other people, I think in general, it's a lack of awareness of what is out there. And it's, I want to say ignorance only from the standpoint, not stupidity, but ignorance. I mean, they just don't know
Mm-hmm.
that there's actually really good tasting non-alcoholic beer out there. And to be honest, most of the people that I have either had over prior to the pandemic, or like buddies of mine who are still, big craft heads and hop heads, and tried some of my non-alcoholic beer, they are blown away with how good it is. Like really seriously impressed and
Mm-hmm.
going, wow, where can I get this? Because maybe they want to, switch them off every once in a while and have, alternate when they're out. But buddy of mine's in a band. He said, generally they a lot of times they pay us in beer while we're playing. They'll, they keep us in beer, but he goes, I can't get wrecked when I'm playing all night, and I get thirsty, so I can't. Water is all right, but I like a beer. And he said this would be great
Yeah.
to have stuff like this. I could. So, I think once there's some more awareness, people will start to open up and be a little more receptive to it. Again, it comes down to people not realizing that there's good stuff out there, or it says more about their own drinking reasons than mine.
Yeah.
All right.
Definitely.
I don't think that there's any. I mentioned the recovery industry earlier, but I think beer education and outreach to marketers and restaurant associations in general. So the NRA in the States, the National Restaurant Association, not the Rifle Association, is I always used to kill me when I'd see NRA. I get an email from the NRA on my desk, and it's like, what? Oh yeah, okay, it's a restaurant group. Um, I don't think they even get it yet. I think some of them, maybe certain editors and certain restaurant managers are getting it, and certainly the ones that either are working with brew pubs or are a brew pub are starting to get customers that come in. And the more places that we have, like Athletic, that have a tap room in addition to their retail program, are going to be hugely beneficial for the industry going forward too. Just to getting people educated that these things are out, because we don't see mass market TV ads. I think there's a couple of Bud Zero ads out now on TV, and maybe some Heineken stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We're starting to get some celebrities like the James Bond thing and the George St. Pierre, the UFC fighter, doing some work with Budweiser. And what happened? Chris disappeared and Tyler has gone big.
Yep.
It's okay.
You're
Um,
back now.
and so I think once some of the bigger players decide that what they're going to do is spend some money on this, because right now it's still small potatoes to them. I don't think they realize how big it could get. Maybe some of them are now. Budweiser certainly is because they're owned by overseas operators,
Hmm.
and the Euros have been doing this pretty successfully for the last 20 years or so. It now accounts, from what last I read, 25% of the beer market in Europe, somewhere in that mark.
Yeah,
That's
Yeah,
pretty significant,
that's not a small percentage.
right?
with Germany leading it, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, here's the German Olympic team sponsored by Erdinger.
Mhm.
They're one of their major suppliers in training. Again, it comes to the health benefits of beer. And again, I think a lot of once some people, trainers and fitness experts, start coming out and realize that um, beer is not only hydrating, it's not dehydrating, which alcohol tends to be, but it also contains flavonoids and all kinds of polyphenols and all kinds of, you know, highfalutin nutrition terms that are just generally good for you. And compared to aspartame and sucralose and all the sweeteners that end up in so many sodas right now. And I think people will be surprised that most cans of beer that I look at have four, maybe five ingredients. The first one, which is water.
Yeah.
Uh, it's not something you pick up where there's a bunch of chemical names on there that you can't pronounce. They're pretty straightforward, and I think in general that's why people made the switch a lot of ways to craft beer originally. Back in the late '80s and early '90s when that the whole thing was starting.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's the kind of the perception I get, and I'm just one guy in Canada. I'm sure if you asked people of different ages, that you'd see different reasons for it, but that's from what my colleagues in the restaurant industry have told me over the years, where things are going.
Nice. You had mentioned some of the nutritional stuff about within the beers, but when we talked last, you kept questioning, like, is it actually this amount of carbs, like,
Right,
and you kept questioning the math, and I
right.
just wanted to hit on that a little bit because I found that really interesting. Is like, is
Sure,
it really as advertised, or
sure. Don't I'm I just assume that everybody questions labels, but they don't. And I realize that's partly a result of my background working in the health and nutrition field, and having to work with data sheets and labeling requirements and understanding what goes into what you can make on as far as claims on labels, uh, and having accurate data. In Canada, it's particularly stringent. The FDA and the FTC in the U.S. Are far more lenient in my experience compared to countries like Canada and Australia. Australia is probably the strictest in the world. The TGA, which is the Therapeutic Goods Association, which monitors most labeling requirements in Australia, they're just horrible to deal with. And I was dealing with vitamin products and stuff like protein powders and creatine and stuff like that. But having worked with food products and also in Canada, I know that having to be accurate on your labels is very important. And the fact that I don't even know if it's required to be on a label in the U.S. The nutrition information on a beer product, is the nutrition information required by law to be on a can of Diet Coke?
For
I don't.
Diet Coke, I believe, but I don't think for alcoholic beverages
yeah,
now.
Correct. So the fact that it contains a trace amount of alcohol, 90% of them do, it puts it into a rather unique category that I think the regulators are still having trouble trying to get a handle on. And, that's its own set of issues. But I think it's incumbent upon the brewers themselves and the manufacturers to make sure that the data and the claims they're making about their products being. I saw one that's, I think it's Suntory, a beer, all free, 0 calories, 0 carbs, zero sugar, zero everything, zero on it.
so
And
what's
I'm
in
going,
it?
so you basically have water. because if everything is zero on it, then all you have is water, other than some artificial flavors. And if you look at I've tried to look at a few of the Suntory labels online because we can't get the product in Canada, um, and that kind of stuff I question. That throws up red flags to me. Um, and I have questioned a couple of the breweries on their nutrition information. And I'm not by any means saying that they're being untruthful. What I'm saying is that I hope that the brewers are taking this seriously and not just slapping stuff on there that says it's only got 3 grams of carbs, or it's only got 10 calories, in the hopes that somebody who's either diabetic or trying to watch their weight or trying to cut calories is going to move to their product because it says it's only 10 calories. I've added up the numbers. I know how many calories go into a gram of carbs and a gram of fat. And when you start adding some of these things up, the numbers don't add up. And I realize there's a certain amount of rounding up and rounding down that they do and they're allowed to do by law. But these fell well outside those parameters. So again, it's like any new food product that's coming onto a market, it's going to get some scrutiny, and it's going to get people looking in closer detail at it. And over time, that generally tends to sort itself out. That people start to fall in line, and I don't think it's a widespread problem. I, for one, am overjoyed when I look at a can of this, and Chris and I were just talking. This is Neil Brothers Lager, and it's weirdly specific. I think you said, Chris, yeah. It's like 39 calories. They would just round that up to 40, and 0.45% alcohol, not 5%. So it's 0.05% less alcohol than something which is less alcohol than a banana. So some of the things I just hope that the breweries and consumers are being label aware and reading these things and just trying to understand that there may be some kinks to iron out when it comes to getting the labels accurate. Again, my paranoia and my also having worked with label regulators and regulatory agencies for so many years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really the informing that people really need to know. Because me personally, the way I see the market, I feel like people know why they would drink it, but they don't know that there's beverages out there. I think that's the main issue. So I think you talked about this quite a bit. They thought they were going to have to do a lot of informing people on why they would drink it. But in reality, there's such a huge market out there of people that know why, they just don't have anything to then support that why. But I think like non-alcoholic versus alcohol-free is kind of a big issue that not many people know about or even would even think less about. Because I've seen some non-alcoholic wine companies market directly to pregnant women. And my research is not technically legal because there is some sort of alcohol. And they market as like alcohol free. They'll have like 0.0 on there, and it's kind of just some marketing, gist that people don't really understand that there's alcohol in it. Even
there's actually trace alcohol in it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though most likely it will not affect, their child or whatever, but still, there's still risk, and you still have to inform them that, consult your doctor, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, there are serious medical concerns, pregnant women, but it could be somebody with diabetes, or it's like saying that something has no gluten in it, and somebody with that celiac goes and drinks the product, and that was processed in a plant that was also doing something else that had gluten in it. That can be life-threatening to somebody with a severe allergy, or an alcohol allergy, a legitimate allergy to alcohol. Even 0.5% could be deadly to them. I think it's a responsibility for the brewers to make sure that what they're telling people is accurate. And I don't think that it's a big problem, but I think like any new food product, it's going to have a few growing pains when it comes to that. But it's still a relatively new industry in North America. We're getting used to it. And there's leaders. What I love seeing is that there's real leaders in this field. Bill Neufeld and the gentleman, I've forgotten his name now, from Wellbeing. And Nikki Sawe from Groovy, and Ted Fleming. These are all people that really want to set set a high bar for the industry, an industry that's going to grow by leaps and bounds. And I think by and large, most of the manufacturers and brewers are very responsible, and they know that their customers are looking for healthy drinks, and they're probably going to be um, more conscious of what's on a label and what's in the product. But yeah, when we have a market, the NA beer market, that is could be hugely beneficial for people that want to eliminate alcohol, whether they're pregnant or for other reasons. We have to be very specific as to what, as you mentioned, about the 0% for a pregnant woman. It literally has to be 0%.
Absolutely. And I wonder if at some point alcohol free, once it becomes possibly better, would take over the reins because it is completely 0%, which would be interesting to see. Because that would help also with regulations, because there are, free range basically, it's alcohol free, but doesn't pregnant women don't have to worry about it. Certain religions don't have to worry about it. So I wonder if that problem is solved one day, that would actually solve all the clarity issues possible.
Do you think that that problem has already kind of been addressed in the UK? Because they're pretty specific about their labeling laws.
Yeah, I think it's because it's such a big market that people are more informed, so that kind of comes with the territory. But I personally don't think as many people care. That what I've heard, that they don't care if it's alcohol free or non-alcoholic. Because I mean, if they have like alcohol issues, in which I kind of want to hit upon that you were talking about earlier with people in AA, with like why AA doesn't support it,
Right.
is because like if like non-alcoholic beers, wines, etc. usually are the better products than alcohol free. It's usually kind of a given. It's the way they're made usually. So when one drinks it, especially if they were an alcoholic in the past, if it tastes so similar to beers that they had in the past, it could trigger them, which could lead to people going spiraling. So it's a trigger effect. So I wonder if, I personally don't think people care, but I think these products shouldn't be marketed to people who can't drink alcohol completely, like directly. Which is kind of a rough go, I guess, because that's a huge part of the market that people think is really important, but I don't think is really important for the growth of it. I think it's mostly the millennials and people that want to be health conscious will be the main growth, because you can't market these products as health. I personally don't think they should be marketed, for like people who are alcoholics, etc. It's more sort of like people like Chris and I, or such as yourself, Sean, who just decided to not drink alcohol as much, you know, and just consume because we enjoy the taste, most important.
Yeah, and there's a lot of merit to what you're saying about whether or not the industry decides to actively market to the recovery sector. That opens up a whole bunch of other issues of ethics and that kind of thing of you certainly don't want to have a product that's going to be responsible for sending somebody into a spiral or back into an addictive lifestyle. And I think a food addict would tell you that's something they also have to manage on their own, because you still need to eat, but if you're a food addict, that has to be managed while still consuming the product you're addicted to, correct?
Absolutely. So, that's why I think AA should support it partially and really support what solves a lot of these addictions, which is mindfulness and consuming only a small amount, just with food, with everything. But people and the way these companies really market things is just all or nothing, which is definitely not the best way to go about anything in the slightest bit. But I think that really comes in with then like therapists and stuff like that. Like Susie Storm, someone that Chris and I really know quite well. We actually introduced non-alcoholic beverages to her, and she had a huge addiction with alcohol in the past. And her therapist said, try it, see how it goes. And she's all for it. And she absolutely loves it. And it doesn't trigger her. She's completely fine. And it worked out for her specifically. But I think that's what should be marketed, is like, everyone's different. Like, everyone is different. And I wish those like AA and all those organizations would support them, but individually support them for specific people.
I didn't mention this to Chris previously, but I'm also a certified recovery coach. So when I'm speaking from not only experience in my own personal journey, but in working with other people, and I think in large part it might be helpful if we approached it in such a way that we called it, a lot of diet products that come out and they say may help you lose weight as part of an overall eating plan.
That's the kicker. Yeah.
Right. So if you say, Neil Brothers 0.5% lager may help support an active recovery lifestyle, or maybe part of a healthy recovery lifestyle, not that you should go out and knock back 12 of these, because that's about a physical behavior and whole other compulsivity issue. Whereas if you make it part of a recovery process, and again, I don't want to try to step on AA or any other organization's toes. I think it can be, and maybe that's probably where that should kind of go off, is to say it could be part of a healthy recovery lifestyle.
Yeah.
And focus, as Tyler mentions, on some of those other demographics and potential market drivers. If we can just segue a little bit to where I think we've got some massive potential.
Absolutely,
for growth, for opportunities for growth in this industry. And again, this comes from my marketing background, is things like that are on the outer edges of food service. So again, I mentioned earlier the facilities, things like golf clubs, sports clubs, service clubs like the Kiwanis and Lions clubs. These organizations that tend to have social functions wrapped into their membership. I have yet to go into a golf course in the province of Ontario and find a non-alcoholic beer. That boggles my mind. And I know what the problem is. The problem is that the breweries and the retailers, the reps, don't have the person power to go out there and hit them up, because they're already trying to hit them up with 4 different draft taps and get them to carry 16 different local craft varieties in their very small bar. But I'm telling you, if the beverage cart person was driving around and had a couple of Heineken Zeros in there, or Run Wilds or something like that, you'd be surprised at how many guys would jump at it and have a chance to have I take a can of Partake Stout with me on the golf course. I sometimes play golf very early in the morning. Instead of a cup of coffee, I've got a cooler bag. It's got a couple of nice cold Partake Stouts in there, and there's my coffee. There's no booze in it. And I think that kind of stuff can go a long way. And that's not the only thing. As you know, curling's a big sport up here from a social aspect. So we have a lot of curling clubs. People often just go to their curling club just to have a couple of drinks. This is all pandemic notwithstanding. Here's another thing. That's a sport that if you're competitive at it and you want to do well at it, you don't want to get hammered. I mean, you want to have a drink afterward with your team, but you'd like to be able to function. And again, if they had these kind of these beverages available, universities, I'll tell you something, if I had non-alcoholic beer, good quality non-alcoholic beer available at my dorm in the pub, I probably wouldn't have gone on the track that I did take when I was in first and second year college. Quite frankly, it becomes a beer fest when you're there. And I think if some healthier and non-alcoholic options are offered that aren't just pop, I think you're going to see an increase in people being more open to this. Even retirement homes. Heck, we've got people that I know that there's some serious chefs that are working with some of these long-term care facilities that are bringing in some really top quality meals for people that they're there all the time. This is where they live. And why not have some good quality NA beer offerings, for these people, especially who may be suffering from health issues that can't drink alcohol anymore. So I think there's a lot of opportunities on that outer rim of the food service industry, not to mention restaurants and bars themselves. I think you guys are lucky in the US, because and I'm only basing this on my own reading of the Facebook groups, is that you seem to have more NA options available in bars and restaurants in the States. We generally, if you go into a bar or restaurant here in Canada, you're going to be offered Beck's or Heineken Zero. That's pretty much it. Some places might, I've seen Erdinger, I think in a couple of British pubs. But other than that, there's not a lot of variety in what is available. And again, it comes down to education because they're being pressured by the beer reps from the big breweries and from the small ones to put their 4 drafts on tap. And they don't have the space in their fridge to be carrying 12 cans or 12 bottles of, 12 cans of Run Wild back there. It will come with time, but there's still a massive opportunity for bars and restaurants, concert halls, stadiums, big potential markets. For when I go to a concert, I don't drink beer. I don't want to be having to drink a 32-ounce Diet Coke when I go to see my favorite band. I would like to be able to have a beer. And for me, I know there's a couple of smaller venues. I'm talking like 800-900 people that the venue would hold now offer partake. Great. And it's starting. I think I've heard some people say that they've got a Heineken Zero at a football stadium or a baseball park somewhere in the U.S. That's awesome. Yeah. I hope to see more of it. Those are some of the opportunities that I see.
And I think it's kind of the same here in the U.S., but in the major cities, those like Athletics of the world, they're like more popular there because the direct to consumer is kind of where it's like vastly going around and becoming more like out there. But I think there's still, yeah, like you were saying, a whole learning curve and a whole needs to be a lot of support from all those industries you were talking about. But yeah, you definitely just see like Beck's, Heineken, and the O'Doul's still in most of the restaurants if there's any NAs at all. But yeah,
I've tried to see I tried to see some of the major hotel chains and airlines and some of the travel oriented hospitality sector increase their options. My wife and I, we go. There's a chain of adults only all inclusives that we go to, and it's stupid for me to go to an all inclusive resort because I don't drink at all. And my wife drinks very little, glass of wine with dinner. So for us to go to these all inclusives, but we like it because we don't want kids running around everywhere. We're on vacation, we just want to go and chill on a beach somewhere. Yet you go there, and I have been able to get O'Doul's. That's it. And these are like major. This is a major Caribbean hotel chain, and I've talked to the senior management. I said, you really could be offering some great stuff here. It's not hard to get. Even Heineken's better than Green Label O'Doul's, my opinion. But, it's a better tasting beer. It's a better quality beer. But for goodness sake, you should be able to get a couple of different varieties. And if people know that it's going to be offered in more places, people will ask for it. And I remember one time I was at one of their hotels in the Bahamas, and I was in the pool, and all they had, our room steward or whatever, had been able to get me some Sharps. That's all he could get. He actually went across the road to the liquor store in Great Exuma and got me some Sharps to put in my beer fridge in my room. And I said, so I'm in the pool, I'm walking around on the floaty mat thing, and I've got this dude comes up and he goes, "Where'd you get that?" And I said, "Oh, the guy put it in a room." He goes, "Oh man," he goes, "if I'd known they could get me that," he goes, "I wouldn't be tanked all the time." He goes, "I would love to be able to just, sip on a few of those." And I'm going like, man, alarm bells are going off, going ding, ding, ding. There's a missed opportunity for all inclusives a little different, but boy, value added for your customer.
Absolutely.
Having those offerings when you go into a restaurant and having somebody say, "You've got that? Great. I'm going to tell my friends. I know my buddy doesn't drink. He'd like to come here with his wife." So I think there's a lot of, I don't want to use the term untapped, but I'll use it, untapped variety, opportunity and potential. And I think the industry is going to grow by leaps and bounds in the next 5 to 10 years. If Europe is any indication, I think the U.S. and things in the U.S. and Canada, as far as the NA beer industry, look really, really good. Don't you? I think you guys would agree.
All of the data I've seen and the people who I've talked to, this is locomotive with no signs of slowing down. It's going full blast, and it's here to stay.
I'm telling people when they can, if they can, to invest in some of these companies that if they do go public or you have an opportunity to get in on some of these things that really have potential, is to do it. I think it'll be worthwhile.
I do have one like major issue I do foresee though that could stop both alcohol and wine or just non-alcoholic stuff is just younger people's appeal to those specific beverages. I personally think that that's going to be the future issue possibly is younger consumers even liking beer and wine specifically, and more towards going to like seltzers and spirits and not actually having a palate for those beverages. So I hope these non-alcoholic beverages that will help, bring those younger consumers in to help, support the industries for, ever. But that is
What do
one
you think would change that, Tyler? What
like
do you think might change that perception that if they're kind of drifting towards more spirits rather than developing a palate? Do you think it's just education, advertising?
I think it's both 100%. And I think it really goes to like the quality of product also and the cost of it. Because as we know that like um, the wine industry missed a lot of consumers because the costs, like the premium cost of wine, weren't appealing to the young consumers, especially millennials, because they couldn't afford it. And a lot of stuff just didn't change. And I think now that like seltzers are in, and like spirits specifically, that people are going towards like low calorie stuff, in which now with non-alcoholic beverages becoming low cal, as we all know, which really appeals to that. But also people who want to get drunk like easily want to go to spirits. Like it's low calories for the most part, depends on what you drink, obviously, but it's easier to do. And I think that if people become to like understand non-alcoholic beverages more as like younger consumers such as myself, I'm only 22, but I think if more non-alcoholic products that are made that are good, and the younger consumers should like them. I still question it because I think a lot of people are gonna be like, why? Especially if they didn't like alcoholic beer or wine in the first place. So I think that's going to be a major issue because I feel like a lot of people go towards alcohol first and then non-alcoholic. The majority of people, I believe. I don't know the stats behind that, so I don't really have statistics to back that up. This is kind of just my insight on that. But I think marijuana is becoming more of a thing. So people are more towards just going that first and not even going towards alcohol at all. Initially, people are just going towards marijuana, which is obviously appealing to non-alcoholic beverages, as we all know. So a lot of those companies are going to go towards that. But it'll be interesting to see how the palates go for younger consumers in the future. But hopefully the non-alcoholic industry will then help keep them, in my opinion.
I wonder, I'm curious as to see how this parallels the track of the way that the gaming and casino industry went when it came to the younger cohorts and demographics, because as I'm sure people of your age know, they're not gamblers. They don't buy lottery tickets. They don't buy in general. Of course, there's exceptions, but they don't. Maybe online poker might be the only exception, but they don't go to casinos. And this is all, again, pandemic notwithstanding. They don't go to casinos. They don't go to spend 4 or 5 hours on a Saturday night sitting in a smoky casino somewhere, like the baby boomers and Gen Xers did. So that industry is dying. It's almost dead. It's almost put a fork in it. It's done. And I think part of that reason is that it was always almost a solitary thing. Once you're sitting at a poker table or a blackjack table, yeah, there's some joking around with some people, but it's not like unless you've got all 6 of your buddies sitting there with you at the same table, which doesn't happen that often. That social aspect is missing. And what some of the casino industry, certainly in Canada, has done is that they developed a concept called the zone in some of our casinos. And it's like a friggin' nightclub, and it's in the middle of the casino. and you go and they've got like a DJ, but he's not a DJ, he's actually some sort of roulette dealer up on the stage, and there's lights and really loud pumping high energy music going, and everybody's got drinks and they're all whooping it up, and it's specifically designed to get millennials into a casino. And they've had a really big success with that in Montreal, at the Casino de Montreal, which is a government run operation. And it's actually been studied and going, man, how do we duplicate this? And what I saw in that, and when I talked to the people that designed that whole program, it was to get that social aspect, as as that demographic tends to be much more socially cohesive, and it's about being out and being seen, and just like my generation was when we were 22 years old. It was about being out and being with everybody and being social. And I wonder if some of the NA bars that are kind of sprouting up in places like New York and maybe some other larger cities, that is that one of the ways that the industry can help grow itself, is by increasing some of these dry bars and getting people that it's cool to go to a dry bar, and you can still go out and smoke your spliff or whatever you're going to do, but you go in and drink non-alcoholic beer and some of the really fancy herbal cocktails that they're coming up with. I've seen some really cool marketing and bar ideas in the US. I haven't seen too many of those happening up here in Canada. So maybe that's one of the doorways in. But I totally hear your point about that market for the millennials. It may not be as strong as we think it is right now, and hopefully that will be. For the sake of,
I was surprised how strong it was, because just me listening to Bill Schufelt and him talking about the industry, that's really who supports his company, is those younger consumers, in which I didn't expect that at all. Right. I forget what stat he gave, but it was definitely the majority of his consumers were millennials and younger people, which is kind of outstanding and pretty crazy.
Yeah, I'm actually I try to get a handle on the Facebook groups on what the average age of people is, and I think we run the gamut. There's a lot of younger people, and there's a lot of people that come from different lifestyle choices of whether or not, why they don't drink, or how much they drink, or whether they drink both. And so I think it's a good cross section, but I think generally it skews a little bit younger than older. And so, it's going to be very interesting over the next 5 years to see how this pans out. I think you're going to be surprised at how many baby boomers catch on to this, and how many older guys like me that want to give up want to put the high test away. And if they find out that there's really good beers, I know guys like my buddy who said, wow, I tasted that Partake IPA and I can't believe there's no alcohol in that. He said, you miss a little the snap, the alcohol burn, but beyond that, he said, I would drink that in a heartbeat. And so hopefully
the older people, like people of your age, who
it's okay, you can say older people.
Yeah. How are they first introduced to the product? People that that consume it, how are they introduced to the product?
To NA beer?
Yes. Yeah.
I would say most of them have been introduced because they've either had to give up alcohol and they're trying to find a substitute. Okay, so they go off in search and they either decide, like me, this isn't good enough for me, I'm not even going to drink it at all, or a friend gave them one and it blew them away. Like,
and those people who search for them, did they go online to find them if they were going to search on their own, or how did they find the NA?
I to be honest, I can only speak from my own personal experience. Is I'm active on Facebook, so I went on to Facebook, and then that led me offline or outside of Facebook to go and start searching, and then I started reading articles about the whole situation in the market, and I'm a market nerd, so I started reading all these market reports and trends and all that kind of stuff, and I read about Europe, and I'm kind of looking at Europe as a bit of a barometer about where things, kind of how they progress over the next few years. This is where we could be going, or be even bigger. Europe had its own reasons for expanding into that market, and they've got a really strong foothold over there. still young over here. The whole industry is still growing and young. We got some, wow, do we have some good beers though. And I think the more good beers that are developed, and the more the technology advances, and that we get higher quality beers with getting more flavor into the beer without and having no alcohol in it, it's really going to be helpful. But we need more players, we need more consumers, and it's all going to be a learning curve on everybody's behalf. The industry needs to educate itself, it needs to educate consumers, and consumers need to be willing to be educated before they move on to the next thing. Hopefully we don't miss that bus, because I think we may have a very small window, and if you catch it right, the industry could, as Chris said, it could just explode. But I think the industry really needs to jump now while we can. I think I'm excited for it, but I hope that we're not being overly optimistic about something that, but I think just as a fan of good quality beer, I think things are definitely headed in the right direction.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I like what you guys are doing too with this podcast and your website, and that goes a long way to helping educate and get some awareness out there. I mean, you're not teaching anybody about the difference between, Citra hops and Mosaic and all that kind of stuff. Maybe you do on another podcast, but what we're trying to do here is encourage people to explore something that they may not have known even existed prior to hearing your podcast. I mean, I told my wife that I was going to be doing a podcast. She goes, "Oh, well," I said, "Yeah, I'll let you know when it's up." She goes, "I'd like to listen to it." And I said, "But, you're not interested in beer." She says, "But I'm interested in you and beer." And I said, "Okay, well, cool. We'll go on and listen to it, because you'll probably learn something about the industry."
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of people will become curious over the next few years. And I think that, again, when I talk about education about the industry and the consumer, if we don't have the big advertising budgets, if the brewers don't have the big marketing budgets to get out there and put ads on during the Super Bowl on TV, TV's about the only place that ads even work is on sporting events anymore, because everybody PVRs everything.
Yeah.
It's going to be things like social networks and word of mouth, and events are going to be huge in getting these things out. I wish we would see more NA brewers at beer festivals. I would go to beer festivals if I knew there was going to be some more NA brewers there. I haven't seen any. Every time there's one here, I look at the exhibitors list and then, no, I'm not going. I'm not going to go and not drink. So I think it would be nice if we got more people participating in those kind of things, because they're all over the place. Every summer, when there's not a pandemic on, just within a 45-minute drive of my house, there's probably 4 or 5 beer festivals every summer. That's great. I mean, that's great. There's a lot of microbreweries around here. There's a lot of little small independent microbreweries and craft breweries, brew pubs that are doing great things. Our Cottage Country, which is just an hour and a half, 2 hours north of Toronto, is massive. Everybody leaves the city and they go up to this, we call it Cottage Country. And they all go up there, and there's all these little breweries up in these little towns up there along the lakes, and it's beautiful, and it's a great market. None of them brew non-alcoholic beer. They need to start.
Yeah. Absolutely. So what's next for you?
What's next for me? I'm just going to keep on keeping on, as they say in the day. Right now, I'm fingers crossed that the vaccine gets into everybody's arms as quickly as possible, so that we can get back and I can get back to live music. Yeah. I think more than anything, thank goodness golf is a socially distanced sport. So I've been able to, when weather permitting in the summertime, I was able to get out a bit last year. But hopefully I'll be seeing some non-alcoholic beer on the golf course that I don't have to bring myself. Just getting out and checking out some live music venues and getting back traveling again. Be nice to get on a plane without worrying about it. But I'm of the age and with a medical condition that puts me at a higher risk. So when they tell me I got to stay home, that's where I stay. I do my grocery phone online order and I go pick it up. I don't even get out of my car once a week.
Yeah.
So that's life in the 90s, as I used to say. That's what we got to deal with right now. My thoughts go down. I hope things take a brighter turn in the U.S. I hope things get peaceful in a hurry, and that everybody is able to sort out and find their way again. It's certainly, we're interested up here. What did somebody say? If the U.S. sneezes, Canada catches a cold. So we have to, we got to look out and make sure everything's okay. You're awful close to us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Maybe in the future we can get on the links and drink some NAs. And also we do these Zoom calls now. We're starting them this Sunday, like at 12 p.m. Eastern. Where like you can come in and we can just have like a happy hour. We just drink NAs on Zoom. So if you're interested also in that, feel
Nice.
free.
Yeah.
We're
Nice.
always up for
I'll send you a link.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that'd be awesome. I definitely doable, as they say. Normally, I'm not booked up, so my calendar is pretty free. And listen, guys, I just want to thank you once again for asking me to come on and share my thoughts. It's always great to talk to some fellow beer dudes, and I look forward to many more of these conversations and to hopefully, helping out a growing industry. It's exciting.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, Sean. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Take care. Be well. Be safe.
Have a good one.
You as
Take
well.
care.
Have a good one.
Bye.